Alumni Association, or FAAA as we call it. This FAAA talk today is organized in collaboration with the Indian Institute of Architects Ahmedabad Center, and we are very happy to have this collaboration with them. Today's talk is by Dr. Roderick Peter Hackney, better known as Rod Hackney. He's a British architect and the past president of the Royal Institute of British Architects and International Union of Architects. He is considered to be the pioneer of community architecture since 1974, when he fought slum clearances in Macclesfield and helped local people improve their own surroundings. Hackney studied architecture at Manchester University, graduating in 1965. He then worked at Arne Jacobsen's practice in Denmark for 3 years before returning to Manchester to undertake a PhD. In 1972, he formed his own practice, Rod Hackney Architect, and in 2008, he co-founded Kansara Hackney Limited, which concentrates on urbanism and architecture. He is a regular contributor to radio programs and a keen debater. Rod has featured in a number of media documentaries on his work called the Hackney Way. Rod Hackney has represented the United Nations on a number of occasions. He is frequently invited to put the case for more community involvement in housing. Rod also communicates through theatre and music. He is also an artist and a writer. His autobiography, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, ranked #1 in one of Britain's retail bookshops in 1989 and was reissued by Routledge in 2014. With that, let us welcome Rod Hackney to give us the talk.
Before I start, and sorry about the voice, I'd like you to applaud is the right word, I think. My business partner, Tia Kansara, who was on the picture a minute ago. There she is. There she is as well. Please stand up, Tara. And I must congratulate CEPT University for being very advanced thinking in employing her at this winter school. And I believe that the Bhutanese Prime Minister is very happy that those who had the time and the expense to go to Bhutan enjoyed it. And even in Abu Dhabi, you enjoyed what you saw there. Total contrast. As you know, Tia speaks Arabic, doesn't speak Bhutanese, but she's now planning, if it's accepted by CEPT school or summer school in Tokyo, where she speaks fluent Japanese. And she'll take you to where she used to live, if that comes to pass. So that wasn't an advert to get her employed, but it might work. Now, this is mainly meant for the students, this talk, because once in the last century, I was a student of architecture. And I want you to always remember that what you do today, you might think you're going to do again tomorrow. You never will. I've just seen a wonderful exhibition of drawings at the archive, CEPT archive drawings. And I'm going to begin with that in a minute, because the drawings I created are now seen as important. They're held in UNESCO in Paris. They're drawings for work I did in Canada and in Libya, Tripoli, Libya, before I was kicked out by Colonel Gaddafi. So if you think, well, I've done a set of drawings now for a nice temple in India, make sure you keep a copy of it, because it will become the legacy, especially when the building you drew as a measure drawing gets demolished. The protection of monuments isn't as good as it should be, and when they've gone, they're gone. They'll be regretted. Europe regrets many demolitions, both forced by the Second World War and man-made by people themselves wanting to get rid of the old to make way for the new. So my talk is a personal journey. When my career changed, I was trained to be a modern architect. And I want to go through the damages done by institutions encouraged by the government to specialise the word architecture. And it isn't meant to be specialised. If you look at the dictionary, architecture is about the world. Some religions have God as the architect of the universe. And I show some slides here on your extreme left. It's only dated a few years ago. And there, the architect did everything. The architects were master builders as well as designers. Very few architects now can build. It is a condition of contract to work for Kansara Hackney that you know how to build. You can be a bricklayer, stonemason, a joiner, a carpenter, electrician, plasterer, a plumber, as long as you have a skill which you can use your hands. It is no use applying for a job in Tia's firm and my firm unless you have a building skill. If we think you're very good, we will train you to be a builder, because I am a qualified builder. But slowly, but surely, with the introduction of structural engineers, civil engineers, quantity surveyors, planners, we have, as a role, look what happened when we look at the last picture on the right here. In the year 2000, we now have project managers. Architects are only involved with about 8% of the world's building stock. Of that 8%, now, we only do that little segment that you see. Many greens on this colour, aren't there? But the architects now are doing less and less. And there's a problem. It will augur the end of the profession, they say. And I'm quoting the Farrell report, Sir Terence Farrell. He was employed by the European governments in Brussels to do a report on architecture and the built environment. And he argued, and he's right, that architects must be involved in the world's urban problems. Now, most architects are taught by their tutors that they wait for a job to come along, a rich client will pay you a fee, and then you make a living. It doesn't work like that in the urban slums. There you have people with no cash. They are not cash rich, but they are brilliant, and they are resource rich. And they can teach the architect to get involved with the urban form. And by 2030, 60% of the world population will live in the cities. Just imagine the work that's needed there from professionals like the architectural profession. And where is this extra work going to happen? 2 countries alone represent 80% of this program, China and India. The reason is most of the migration of the rural to the city is going to accelerate. And India at the moment, well, when this slide was taken, which was about 2 years ago, represents, it's now 32% by the way, and China is now 46%. Again, by 2030, there'll be a bigger percentage of people living in cities in China and India than living in the rural areas. Brazil follows because it's still got potential. But Brazil is a small country compared with China and India, and a smaller country still is the United States, where already 80+% live in the cities. There isn't much room there for migration. People still move to the big cities, but it's no big deal. Europe is very slow. It's a slow part of the world. So where is the work for architects? It's going to be in China and India. That's why you see many people now from the West courting China and courting India. Just a European slide to show you how ridiculous the length of course has become for architects. In the old days, you didn't go to college. In the first slide I showed you, second slide, to be 100% involved in the building industry, you didn't go to college. You were a master builder, but you did drawings. You drew something before you built it. But look, you take Poland, the average is 8 years. 9 years in Czech Republic, Slovakia rather. I'll show you that. Slovakia, where are you there? You know, it takes 6 years to be a surgeon, a professional surgeon. Why should it take so long to be an architect? In the British Isles, Ireland, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, it takes 7 years, like Portugal. 8 years, in Germany. In the Scandinavian countries, 5 years to be an architect. The reality is it doesn't need that long, right? Because you don't do a lot of work in the building trade. Probably 2 to 3 years, and then you need work understanding materials and things like that. So Europe has produced a master plan taking the countries like Holland, 5, Spain 5, and then you've got these countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They are members of the 28 countries of Europe. They take a third of your life to be trained to be an architect. It's crazy. It's the longest course in the world. So that's going to change. European Union is looking at 6 years or less to be an architect. So, now the reason I tell you this is a personal story, I would have been normally a modern architect now, probably very proficient with CAD, probably retired with some staff, and then painting, writing books, which I do, as well as running a firm with TIA. And this is why I think you have to keep copies of your drawings. This is Upper Canada Village. These are my working drawings. These are now preserved by UNESCO in Paris as the only examples of measured drawings done in 1966, my drawings. This is my thesis project. I got into big trouble with this because my tutor said, "Why are you keeping an old building? When the trains no longer use the station, you don't need the station." Well, that was the thought in the 60s. Now, stations are fantastic with the span. They can become exhibition centres. And that is now the biggest exhibition centre in the north of England. Nothing to do with me, it's just in my thesis project. This is it here. Nothing coming along the platforms. So if you have a good idea about replenishment, which Tia is an expert on, that is reusing old buildings, taking less out of life than you put in, then you're preserving old buildings, just as the measured drawing exhibition of CEPT in CEPT archives shows, is absolutely essential. And then you must travel. It's never been better to travel. I know it costs money, but airline prices will go down in 2016 because the cost of kerosene for the airline will be cheaper. In the old days, you booked early to get a cheap flight. Now you leave it to the last minute to get a cheaper flight. But I worked twice in twice in Libya, I'll get it right in a minute, twice in Canada. I met a wonderful man called Buckminster Fuller, who was an architect, a builder, a philosopher. And he gave me a wonderful book called Operation Manual for Spaceship Earth, treating the planet as a spaceship. It could only have so many people living in it before its resources were no longer available. And when he did it, the population was only 3 billion. 3 billion. We now have 7.3 billion in the world. It's a lot of people to feed, a lot of people's mouths. A lot of people go hungry, as you know. You're in a country where it's as bad as the United States, sometimes in India. The disparity between rich and poor is huge, right? But it will change as the poor are recognised as a resource. Community architecture is about raising the spirit and tapping the human potential of slum dwellers. And to do that, by accident, after I started my career, going to Libya first, working for the government. Again, I did work in drawings, measured drawings, of Sabratha and Leptis Magna. And the reason I did those drawings is many of the squatters coming from the deserts in the Sahara were encouraged by King Idris because of oil in Libya. They would have a free house if they came to Benghazi and Tripoli. Well, it takes time to build a house, so I was employed to teach the squatters that arrived in these architectural sites, because there's a lot of shade when you get behind here, because the temperature is very high. It's as bad as it is in Gujarat in summer in Libya. Although they have the sea breezes, a lot of the temperature comes from the Sahara. And I managed to persuade them not to use the heritage sites as a squat. And my job was to teach them to build new houses in Tripoli when it came to Leptis Magna and is Sabratha in Benghazi. My mentor was Hassan Fatih from Cairo, a beautiful man. And when I went up the political pole, became president of everything that was moving architecturally, I gave him a gold medal for his work in preserving Arabic architecture. He never did air conditioning, but his houses were livable in. You know, it could be in the desert in Egypt, it could be 43, 44 outside, but none of his houses went above 28, naturally ventilated. I got kicked out of Libya because I wasn't Libyan. They gave me two choices. I could stay in Libya but in jail, or be offered free passage home. I said, can I have some time to think about this difficult choice? Which you have to do because you could upset your Arab host. If you said yes, there's no question. They would think you were being rude. So I said, can I think about it overnight? They said, no more, because the planes leave tomorrow morning. So I left with my wife and we went home. No money, no passport, but we did have a stamp. Normally it takes 2 months to get out of Libya without a war. You have to pay your bills, you have to pay the taxes, everything. But when you get 24 hours to leave, you don't have to pay any taxes. Not that you could anyway. But my passport is still in Tripoli, and they owe me wages, which with interest will be very useful. But after the war of 3 years ago, stupid war, when the French and the British kowtowed to the Americans, they created havoc. They thought by getting rid of the leader, you solve the problems, as if they didn't already know that from getting rid of the leaders in Afghanistan and Iraq. But the colonial nations still haven't learned. The American new colonial nation hasn't learned that you don't destroy a whole society when you do regime change. You know, the one thing the colonial powers did, the French, the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Italians, even the Germans were in Africa, and they only got rid of the heads. You go into a country, got the head of the king off, and you preserve the civil service, and you preserve the infrastructure. The Americans believed you get rid of the whole Ba'athist party in Iraq and things will be good. Well, it's chaos, as you know. They've not learned. They invaded Afghanistan. The Russians and the British could do nothing with Afghanistan. They were going to get rid of the Taliban. The Taliban are farmers. One season they grow poppies, next season they shoot you. They had nothing to do. So you can't kill the whole population. And Afghanistan now is the poorer for it. It's my political lecture. I did the central bank in Kuwait, And this is how stupid the brief can be. The brief was written by the bank. It is the Reserve Bank of Kuwait. And it said the most expensive thing for you to do, Rod, I was working for Arnie Eckerson, was to make sure that when the Israelis send nuclear weapons to destroy our bank, that when civilization returns to Kuwait in 5,000 years, the strong room is preserved and the gold is still there. The Israelis didn't bomb Kuwait. The Brotherhood from Baghdad arrived with a tank, went up to the front door, drove the tank through the front door entrance, and with little guns said, "We'd like the strong room open, please." And they took all the gold back to Baghdad and then destroyed the building. What a cheek, my building, right? I complained to Zaha Hadid. She said, "Nothing to do with me, Rod, I'm British." I said, "Well, you came from Iraq." Right? I said, "Where's your responsibility?" She said, "You're just unlucky." So beware the stupid briefs from the client, because they don't sustain through time. And then I got onto banks. If you can do the Kuwait National Bank, Rod, you can do the Amex Bank in Copenhagen. And believe it or not, Tia and I were asked to do the Samba Bank in Saudi Arabia. For the students of Tia, ask her one day how she got into Saudi without a husband, without an uncle, without a brother, and under 40. It's a story in itself. Right? It's so easy for the Saudis to change the rules. They did it for Mrs. Thatcher, and they did it for Tia. She's a mister. Right? When we arrived in Riyadh, we were shaking, because we know we committed a crime. And the first sign we saw saying "death to passengers have drugs," right, didn't help. Right? And then when it came out, there was a signpost waiting for us, Dr. Hackney and Mr. Kansara. Right? And that's how it's so easy. When the government wants you to come in, the fact you're a woman, no problem. You're just a mister while you're there. And Tia survived, except she wanted to go running in the morning. This was a problem. Women do not run in Riyadh by themselves. Right? So the hotel said, "No, wait there, we'll find a place where you can run." And the bus never came. They said, "You can't use the swim pool." I said, "There's nobody in the swim pool. It says men only." I said, "She's a man." They said, "No, she's not." I said, "Look, visa, man." They said, "No, it's a woman." Right? So, different rules applied. But enjoy it, right? Because we enjoyed it. We were only there for a competition, but then they asked us to employ one of three people. Norman Foster from Britain, Woods Baggett from Sydney, and Hock from St. Louis. Now, I came back with all the archives of Arnie Eckerson. He gave me all his drawings, handmade drawings, all his photographs, and his wife said, "Write a book, Rod, about my husband." He died in 1971. So I came back to Manchester and lived in a slum. There you are, there's my house. It was going to be knocked down. It was unfit for human habitation. Dogs could live there, but not humans, right? Because they didn't have an act of parliament for dogs. But I said to my neighbours, "I'm very selfish. This is going to last 2 years, this building, by which time I will be doctor, and I'll say adios, bye-bye." They said, "How selfish is that? You come and live in our community. You have 2 degrees. We have a street of 1,000 people. That's 2 degrees more than anything in the street. And you want a 3rd degree? What sort of person are you?" So eventually I got in touch with my tutor, and I said, "Do you mind if I delay my PhD?" He said, "What for?" I Same tutor didn't want me to renovate the station, Derrick did, to save my house. He said, it's not necessary, you don't have to save your house. Just move house. And there's the back of my house. Shared toilets, shared wash houses, dog kennel, washing. Very old, but a community, a home for people. There's me. Look at the flares. You have to become a politician. The council told me, Rod, you can have an outside toilet. You have one. If you have an outside toilet, you can't have an inside one. So I thought, right. I organised one Saturday to knock down all the outside toilets. Then on Monday I said, we've no toilets. They said, you're a vandal. There were toilets on Friday, there were no toilets on Monday. We're going to arrest you. The police came and said, it's a very stupid thing, they want us to arrest you for knocking toilets down. That's not against the law. We told them. So I survived. And then we started a 2-year fight to save these houses. And this is what they looked like when we began. And this is what they looked like when we finished. And it's all done by people themselves. And I made an office. 2 little schemes. And you know, it's very funny. The number of enemies I made, right, overnight. People thought I was breaking the British RIBA Code of Conduct by deliberately going to work in an area and getting work. And they got me. They said, Rod, you should have charged a 10% mandatory fee. And I said, 10% of nothing is nothing. And they said, no. 10% of what the builder would cost if you built it. And I said, we couldn't afford to employ builders. That's irrelevant, they said. So I was advised by Lord Scarman I was in trouble. Big trouble. Because I had so many enemies. It didn't help because the future King of England went on television and said, I'm a friend. Right? Well, you know, I come from the wrong side of the street. You know, I've never been a friend of royalty. So I created enemies there. So we went to the RIBA and Lord Scarman said, Rod, 2 choices. Plead guilty, get on your knees and plead forgiveness. Or change the system. He said, I don't think you're good on your knees, are you? I said, no, bad on my knees. So how do I change the system? He said, you become president, and in the presidential manifesto, you say why you're standing for president. I said, I'm standing for president to change the rules to allow architects to work for the poor. I won. Right, the first person to ever win. Normally, since 1831, they always chose a man. Sometimes had a beard, depending on the fashion. They were all 50 plus. And they were all respectable. Now we have an unrespectable president who comes from these poor houses, who is a friend of the future King of England. And I changed the rules overnight, and now it's possible in Britain to work for nothing, working for the poor. And it went round the world. Magazine. Most of the magazines that my work were women's magazines. Where do you think that is? Be careful. The man that organised the exhibition in this building got it right. He's the first person to get it right. I normally open my book. So where do you think that's from? And he said, London. I said, how did you know? The washing lines. Giveaway. Bangladeshi community in London. And this is one of my schemes in Stoke-on-Trent. People from Pakistan. And the funny thing is, as you change your career, you become popular, you become president of this, you start being a hero on television, and then people might ask you to conferences. And this slide shows how hypocritical the British political system is. The Conservatives, the Labour, the Alliance, and the raving loony party all applauded me for the same speech. Exactly the same speech. And I then realised politicians are very adept at being close enough to you that when you're successful, we were there. We stood next to Rod, we knew it would be successful, but sufficiently distanced. If you fail, to say, we never thought it would work. We're never that close to him. And don't forget, when you're a community architect, you have to succeed. You're carrying the hopes and aspirations of the poor, who don't normally get a chance. They've got to get it right. And here he is. This is Charles Correa getting his gold medal, and the president on the right, Mr. Manser, and future king. And he, for about 25 years, supported the poor people in Britain. Now he's been prepared for king and has to slightly distance himself from the poor. Otherwise, he's a person, he's a lovely person, by the way. He has a bad press. He speaks to plants. He says hello to the trees. This is not good in Britain. People think you're a bit funny. Talking to the plants, well, they listen, they hear you. Right. So my career totally changed. I took him to America. I became, I wrote his speeches. I was on the Royal Yacht, Royal Train, stayed in the palaces, and he was a big success in America. They liked him. But my enemies grew and grew. And most people wanted me to fail. This is me. Right? This is me. This is me. So you have to keep running fast. Don't let them catch you. In Britain, they call the men in grey suits. You never know who they are. But they're the people that will silence you, either embarrass you. They couldn't embarrass me because I had no file. When these men in grey suits come along to Harold Macmillan or Harold Wilson, Prime Ministers, and say, Harold, we'd like you to accept a job. We're going to upgrade you to the House of Lords. And you say, no, I'm not finished. They say, well, it'd be very hard if this file we have got into the hands of the press. We don't want that, do we? I'll accept the job in the House of Lords. Mrs. Thatcher, they couldn't get rid of. She was a woman. And then you never get a woman as a Prime Minister. And Rod Hackney, they could never get rid of because he was poor. He came from the working classes. So we had lots of people in the 60s, 70s, 80s writing, including one of Tia's professors, who's now just died in Bartlett School in England. He wrote a book, Cities of Tomorrow, and makes a big deal about my work. There he is. Peter Hall, beautiful man. Prince of Wales wrote me letters. Now look, you're the first people in India to see a letter to Rod from the King. And that says, Rod, I'm very worried about the riots in Birmingham. Can you stop them? Piece of cake. So I put in some architects. I went to live in the area, in Hansgrove, Saltley, George Arthur Road. There he is, by the way. And this is my team. Then, that worked. We had riots again in 2011. But this time, the architects were blamed. Les Lord Scarman, he saved my life a few times. And all of a sudden, it became international. No longer modern architecture, just this. My house. Awards galore. And when these people learn skills of building, they say when they're finished, Rod, what do we do now? Well, what you do is this. You build new ones. Building skill. These are the poor, the same as you have in Darrowby. This is our latest scheme in Macclesfield. By the way, I still live in Macclesfield. People say, where are your offices, Rod? So, well, you know, Paris, London, Abu Dhabi, Tokyo, and Macclesfield, head office, right? Do mills, redundant mills. You saw some mills outside of the exhibition. Another letter from the man. Save the mill, Rod. Save the mill. I did it. Hackney is an artist, so it's the owner, silver, the original owner, salt. They would have liked him in Gujarat. He didn't believe in drink. He built a salt air village, no pub. Hackney and Hackney. And these are various schemes throughout the world. Berlin, Sweden. And then Shenzhen in China. And all of a sudden, people say it's a basic human right to work in the slum. So architects have a job to do. Forget CAD drawings, forget sitting in an office where you produce working drawings. Go and work for the poor. T and I work in the Emirates. I did a lovely job for the Bangladeshi community. Yes. And judged the competition, gave prizes for the UN. And when the riots came back to Britain under this man's reign, this time, because of the success of the poor areas that community architects have been involved in, they then said the best way of dealing with the riots is to use architects. Right? And use sustainable work. That doesn't mean solar collectors. It means tapping the human resources of beings, you know, people. When I lived in the Darrowby slum, I saw the future of the West. I give lectures all over the world. Just come back from Lima. And one American professor from Harvard said, Rod, were you joking when he said the United States will one day be like India? I said, if it's lucky, it'll be like India, right? If it's not destroyed from within. I said, you're so powerful, you'll never be destroyed from outside. But watch your back. Right? People are getting a bit agitated in America. And some of my clients, Prime Minister and President, Ramadasa, I helped with the 1 million house program. Before she was killed, Benazir Bhutto, I worked in Karachi in the slum and Peshawar in near the Afghan. She speaks perfect Afghan. And then I lived here. And I gave Charles Greer 2 medals, RIBA and UIA, and work in Kolkata at the Sustainable Institute. I'm mad about modern air conditioning based on the Iranian way of doing it, not based on the American air conditioning, which is not good for you. You know, you'll die from it. In this building here, listen, the Iranian desert has climate sometimes much drier than in India. But look at the trick. They have water in the kanats. They have high chimneys. The temperature here might be 45, 46. In here, 28. With no artificial air conditioning. When I went to the tower top of Burj Khalifa with the boss for Skidmore and Merrill, I said you could have air conditioned the whole of this building from 3/4 of a kilometre high. He said, we do a bit of it, Rod. But I said, you could do a lot of it. You needn't have had any artificial air conditioning. He said, we couldn't do that, Rod. We're American. We follow the LEED standard. And we wanted to make a zero carbon, zero waste building. It's not. It's big carbon, big waste. But when you trade in America, you think that's the way to do it. And there's some Europeans copying. Bad news. Look to the future. Look to Iran. Look to India. Right? They know how to do it. They'll last for 2,000 years, not 50, which is all the air conditioning systems designed by the Americans will last for. War zones. Very good for community architecture. This is one of the sponsors for T&I, Microsoft man, in Tokyo. T.S. struck a chord with him, and he now supports slum renewal in South Africa, in the townships. And with this lady. The townships are the future of South Africa, not Johannesburg skyscrapers. The townships, because it involves people. When you have a good shelter, when you protect it from the elements, and you can bring up a family in security, and you're warm when it's cold, and you're cold when you're warm, when it's warm, you begin to cherish being a human being. Men in particular are immune to good sense when it comes to homes. The women keep it together. And luckily in Africa, the women build houses, particularly East Africa, rather than the men. So I worked in Belfast and in Germany. And Tia and I are working here now. When the war in Lebanon ends, this project we will finish in 2030. It's Tripoli, designed by Oscar Niemeyer. He's a friend of ours. Just died, 104 years old. I was saying to this guy, in Brazil, they have a fantastic sense of humour. His physician on his death certificate, when he died at 104, said, if he hadn't have drunk a bottle of wine a day, smoked 5 cigars a day, and led a quiet life with women, he would have lived longer. Right? Well, 104. The average age of a Brazilian man is 68. And he's the letter of appointment from just before he died. Tia went to Rio to get this, and she works with his grandson. Him. Cake. And this is the job. It's the renewal of the World Fair in Lebanon. Stopped in 1975 because of the war. It's still stopped because there's still another war. But we will start it again when the Syrian war has sorted itself out. And 2 of my heroes, some of my members of staff with Tia and me there. Right, him, because he means well, done a lot of work for the poor in England. And Professor Wu, Tsinghua University, very special. Professor Wu was rounded up when the Red Guards visited Tsinghua University. And he asked the students, what do you do with these professors? And they sent all the professors back, thank you, to the paddy fields. Professor Wu was already at that age, still living by the way, but the students said he's very good with filling out forms, so he didn't have to get wet in the rice fields. He became the scribe for the village during the periods of the Red Guards. He's now back at Tsinghua University. He's 93, 94. Friend of Tia's in particular, and wants to teach her Kung Fu at his age. And she will learn Mandarin as a song, quid pro quo. But he's so special. And he's the one that helped with the Olympic Games in Beijing. My final slide. I gave this book away to the organizer of the exhibition, but I've been written about in many works. But if you ever want my book, you can get it now. It's this blue copy. This one, in 5 languages, including English. It's not in Gujarati yet. It's the same book but a different cover, and it's been reprinted. And there's the ISBN number. So I've been told to leave some time for questions. I hope I haven't talked out of time. So with questions, sir, with you. Thank you for listening. It's not an offence to ask a question. It's allowed. I'm not in North Korea, am I?
Hi, Rod. I'd like to ask you a question, and we've got a bit of background together. Maybe you could, for the younger architects here, shed a bit of light on the ethics of architecture. You and I were involved in with the RIBA and Israel and the UIA on an issue where we passed a motion asking the UIA to remind the Israeli Institute and its members that they shouldn't be building on the settlement lands of Palestine. So I'm wondering really about your position on the ethics of architecture, because clearly in what you've shown, you've got a very strong ethic about community architecture, whereas with Netanyahu and what's happening in Israel, one might say there's a counter ethic. So I'm just curious about your position in terms of architectural education and ethics.
It's very important that architecture isn't used as a political weapon. There was a motion in front of the last UIA Congress Assembly in Durban in 2014, where Gia and I attended, which condemned, it didn't pass, condemned the Israeli Institute of Architects for allowing buildings in the occupied territories of Palestine. And then we realised the strength of the lobby against the president of the RIBA, Stephen Hodder, who allowed the council to adopt a motion that the RIBA supports, encouraging the UIA to blacklist the Israeli Society of Architects. And as a precedent, it said the British Institute, RIBA again, was the first to lead the campaign against apartheid in South Africa. Apartheid, though, was on the way out, right? And so, in a way, the RIBA was successful with their campaign. But they failed with their campaign regarding Israel, because the lobby against the RIBA grew and grew and grew. People said, we will withdraw our sponsorship of the RIBA, or our membership of the RIBA. And poor Stephen, who was a decent man, didn't expect this sort of backlash. From the previous president's initiative, we had an Irish president from Dublin, very good president too, and she didn't realise what she was getting into. So when you go in for a political fight, you have to have a nous if you're going to win or lose. And that's a skill you get from being young. The older you get, the less skilled you get at smelling a trap. And many architect in his career or her career is offered a trap. And that's why the Replenish programme that Tia has initiated, even though it's there, you don't have to accept it. And don't take it because it's on offer. If you're in doubt, if you're uncomfortable, if you're out of your depth, don't touch it. Or go to jail and fight it in jail. Do a Mandela. Right? But you've got to win. Right? And we've both got lots of Icelandic friends. The problem with these big countries is they're bullies. The Icelandic government decided that the British government was taking too much cod out of the waters of Iceland. So instead of 12 miles, they unanimously, without asking anybody, said, from tomorrow, it's 200 miles. So what did the British do? They sent 2 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers to Reykjavik, aiming their weaponry at Reykjavik. Now, if you're born on an island that's been made, people say there's no more land. Wrong. Iceland's getting bigger and bigger. Right, it's in the middle of the Icelandic Atlantic drift, so it's like the moon. Magna, you know, you're walking along the top, you're going up and down, there's red. You put a stick in, it comes out lit. Right. They were not afraid of British nuclear power boats. They said, you're going to use those weapons, because if you don't, we'll arrest you. You're invading our territory. And in the end, the British left. Right. They called it a peace. Well, it was. They gave in. Right. So if you're powerful, beware you don't use your power in whatever it is, because one day it'll come back and haunt you. Because power is only secure if people respect it for the right reasons. Right? They didn't in South Africa. Right? Very busy regime, fantastic security system. It collapsed. East Germany. I was there. I showed you pictures of Kreuzberg where I worked. The wall went right through our scheme. It's no longer there. It collapsed. Right? In the end, if you keep people down, they eventually will come to the surface. That's the greatness of human beings' spirit. You can't squash the wish to be free. And architects should realise, if they want friends, forget governments, forget rich clients, make a pact with ordinary people. They'll protect you. I was protected by ordinary people against the ravages of the RIBA, the British government, the press. Right? Does that answer your question? Good.
So when you're working with a community and you decide on something that you think is good for them, but they don't agree with you, so then where do you draw the line? Like, who has the final say on the...
The question is wrong, but it's a good question. You've assumed something. The architect knows best.
No,
he or she doesn't. I became a member of their community. I had a skill they didn't have. I'm called an architect. And I realized they knew what they wanted. Very simple. They wanted to stay in their homes. It wasn't for me to talk about that, but to help them politically. When I represented them in the council, we had to take the council to court. Take the government to court. Governments are no good in court. They only work 5 days a week. Right? Whereas people work 7 days a week. They only work 9 to 5, which really means 10:30 to 3:30. Right? You have so much time to win. Right? We knocked down the toilets while they were sleeping. Right? Right? And I never said, this is what you should do. They said, this is what we want, Rod. You make it work. The architect became big. When I went to see Walter Isaac, the Macclesfield town clerk, he said, you are a disgrace to your profession. I said, well, how do you do? How are you? I just met him. He said, you come in here with your middle class ideals. Before you came, this was a peaceful town. We knocked houses down which were unfit to live in, and you're arguing they should be lived in? You should be arrested. I said, well, you already tried that once, right? It's not going to work. He said, well, this town is not big enough for two of us. I said, well, I'm not leaving. Right? But if you stay, you'll have to comply with central government's wishes. Because when you take your local government to court, central government comes up, sorts it out. And they send up somebody once to play golf on Friday. They come up Monday midday. They settle in the hotel, and they have 10 to 4 plus 2-hour lunch break. And then you have a room like this. The council's on this side with 6 people: chief executive, lawyer, architect, politician on that side. 1,000 people. So you're the inspector, and you say, is this the council? And somebody says, no, sir, we are the council. And these people, who are they represented by? Stand up, Rod. They have lawyers. We can't afford lawyers. And lawyers are a waste of time. Right? They look at the book. It's going to cost you. And you might not lose, might not win. I look at the book and say, I think we've got them. So I stood up and he said, who are you? I said, I'm a resident. Yes, but who represents you? I said, and they all shouted, Rod! Rod represents us. He's an architect. So the inspector said, come up here to me. The lawyer came up. He said, do these people want to say something? And he had a microphone. He hadn't switched it off. And they said, we all want to say something. But we only want 5 minutes. 5 minutes times 1,000 is not playing golf on Friday for 5 weeks. So he instead of carrying on, he then says, I adjourn the session. I want Rod and Mr. Butterfield in my office, and we're going to sort something out. So these people, not many worked, mainly unemployed, were disappointed. So I said, why don't you let these people stay, sir? And can you come back at 5 to 4, explain why and what you've done? Well, if they want to. I said, well, they took it. Those that work, 5%, taking time off work. And those that don't work, like the biscuits and the coffee, which is free. Right? So they'll stay. So we came back at 5 to 4. He said, I have a problem. Apparently, the council don't have the 1969 Housing Act in their possession. We're 1971, by the way. I can imagine that now. But Rod has a copy. I have a copy. So I'm giving the council to tomorrow at 10 o'clock to read it, with particular reference to clause 4B, which says, before the council ever think about demolishing, they consider the options of renovation by people themselves. So we're winning. We haven't done anything yet, we're winning. Right. So I gave a copy of my 1960 Housing Act to Mr. Butterworth. You know what he did? The next morning he said, I was up till 11 o'clock reading this. Right. Instead of saying I was up all night reading it. Right. 11 o'clock was a big deal for him. And then we had 3 days. 1 or 2 people came up. And then the inspector on Thursday, 10 o'clock, said, I've decided. I've now got a little motion here. I'm putting it to the residents that they will do their own housing. They will do it by the 23rd of June, 1974, important date, another story. And the council will pay for it. Right. Won't you, council? We don't have any money. Don't worry. Under the Local Government Act, your councillors will be surcharged. They have houses. They will pay. And Rod organised them. So never presume you know better than a slum dweller. We have not been trained to know better. We know little. We think we're special. We're not. but we have a degree, so use it. Flaunt it around. Right? I'm the architect. Right? Especially when you want some money from building societies, because you have to pay for building materials. They're not cheap. Most of our building materials came from skips, but sometimes you want new materials. A damp-proof course. Right? You don't get that on a skip. You have to buy that. So don't presume that you know anything that can help the residents, except you've had education. And you've got courage, and you're young. But you've got to live in the scheme. If you're doing work in the slums of Ahmedabad, you don't work in the middle of a city, 9 to 5, or stay with your mum and dad. You move in for 5 to 10 years. And then the people tell you what you should do. And then you just simply make it work. You're the vehicle to communicate their wishes to government and banks. Then you get an education. Then you get known as somebody who can do something. Because, most architects don't do anything. They prostitute their talents, waiting for somebody to pay money. When you can go out there and find the work. Look at those figures I had in the 5th slide, the poor in the inner cities. The amount of work available for architects is huge. And nobody else wants to do it. Architects still have a vision. They're stupid enough to think they can change the world. Nothing wrong with that. But they must go when it hurts. Don't wait for a nice, juicy job. Go and find the work. It's all around. If you walk home tonight, it's there, everywhere. Right, helping the poor. Because they're the resource. They're the future of the world. They're the future of America. Right, where the divide is stupid. Right, you have crazy people standing for president, wanting a wall along Canada, a wall along Mexico, and kick the Muslims out. Where's that come from? Right? These are the people who will save America. Right? The poor immigrants. And all of Europe is full of immigrants. I'm an immigrant. Right? The world is full of immigrants. And the UN figures are half the world will be immigrants in 2050. So, enjoy it.
So my question is, what do you do in a situation when the people themselves do not want the change you want to give them? When they're so used to their life that they fear any change, and then how do you ensure people's participation?
They have to trust you first. So you spend the first two years being a good neighbour and behaving, and never presume they don't want to better their environment. Bad. Very middle class. And don't tell me what Ted Heath, the Prime Minister of England, said. Rod, these people are poor because they can't do anything about it. Prime Minister, for God's sake. They can't do anything about it because the system is against them. You don't change the people, you change the system. So after 2 years, when they say hi, and they know you, and your funny accent, and you speak English, that's useful. In Gujarat, that's very useful. A lot of these people don't speak Gujarati. Never mind English. Right? So 2 years, you assimilate. Get rid of all the false expectations your parents have. My boy's going to be an architect. He's going to work in an office. Shock your parents. When your parents see Prime Minister Modi coming down and say, "This is wonderful. This is my state. Who did the work? The residents did it. I hear you had an architect here. He's there. Come here, architect. Come and work for government." You say no, by the way. You say, "Thank you for the offer, but I'd like the government to work for these people." When T and I did our peace treaty in Hiroshima, my son, T is the British Army, my son is British Army. And he said, "Dad, T would be great working for you." So I was introduced to Tia. And she said, not a chance. I'll work with you. There am I thinking, young girl, old man, they'll be working for me. Even having lived in slums for years, I still have old-fashioned prejudices. And guess how this works. You know, we were in Kishinev over New Year, and a lot of Indian boys from New Delhi thought Tia was, you know, worth talking to. How exactly do you work? Tia said, I don't know, it works. Well, what do you do? Anything. What would you like me to do? Well, what's your business plan? And said, you must speak to Rod about that. They reluctantly speak to me. Is Tia really a business plan? I said, yeah. She says you have a business plan. I said, yes. And it's very short. My business plan says we don't have a business plan. Right? Because you don't need one. We don't need to borrow money. We can live on our wits. Right? So get rid of all this middle class rubbish that you know better for the people that will save the world. Come the revolution, the middle classes will be eaten because they're good food, but they won't be able to fix anything. In America, they can shoot people, but they'll run out of ammunition. So the people that survive are the people that survive now. So learn quick, and it gives you a future. When you're my age, right, you're probably, what, 22? Let's say you're 50 years younger than me. Oh, even better. 53 years younger than me. Half a century. Think what you'll be doing, right? In 2060, whatever it is. It'll be a different Ahmedabad. Ahmedabad is already as big as London. By 2060, it'll be 10 times bigger. London will be a nice heritage place to go and take pictures, like Italy is now. But this will be the centre of the world. This and China. And you know, American tourists say, once we were rich, now it's so expensive to come to Ahmedabad. You have to stay in a B&B or a, what's it called? What's the cheap B&Bs? Airbnb. 50 years ago, we stayed in the Hilton. We can't afford clothes anymore. Pity. What a shame. Any more middle-class questions?
Thank you, Rod. May I request Praveen Patel to deliver the word of thanks?
I will just take 2 minutes. My name is Praveen Patel, and I am an architect from 1975 batch and representative of our batch in FAAA. I am here as the Vice Chairman of the Indian Institute of Architects, Ahmedabad Center. Rod, we could all feel that you had a nice journey with lots of excitement. We could travel with you during the presentation. Thank you very much for the lovely presentation. Kansara, right? She's Gujarati, and Gujarati આવડે મારી સાથે ગુજરાતીમાં વાતો કરે છે. She's Tia. Thank you, Tia, for accompanying him. I thank CEPT for kind support for our lecture series. I thank IIA Ahmedabad Center on behalf of FAAA, and I thank FAAA on behalf of IIA Ahmedabad Center. I thank you all for spending your time this evening, and I'm sure you must go with lots of memories of this event. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you all. Play talk on Wednesday evening.